Back on my show is one of my favorite crystal experts, Nicholas Pearson, to talk about his latest book, Crystals for Psychic Defense. I consider this to be one of the best books I've read on the subject of modern psychic protection. In this episode, we discuss the more active protective practices like magical techniques for warding your home, your car, and workspace, as well as potential ill wishing from those around you. We also talk about how to combat and neutralize psychic attack utilizing the techniques of binding, banishing, reversal, crystal grid layouts, and exorcism for spirit release. His latest book also includes an in-depth directory of 145 of the most powerful and effective crystals and gemstones for protection and recovery from psychic attack. This is an awesome episode on psychic defense filled with advice and tools you can use immediately. For more information on this episode, please visit the show notes page at theconsciousdiva.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at theconsciousdiva. Hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you so much for listening. Hi, Nicholas. Thank you so much for coming back. Love chatting with you about crystals.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. And your latest book, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, 145 gemstones for banishing, binding, and magical protection, is absolutely awesome. This is seriously the best book I think I've ever read on psychic self-defense. Like, seriously.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. This one has a lot of information in it that I really wish I had known, earlier on in my life. I just thought, wow, this is really fantastic, and it's going to be a great manual or tool for so many people. So let's begin with, why do we need to have crystals for self-defense, for psychic self-defense?
Although I believe in the inherent goodness of people and the universe, our world kind of sucks sometimes. Things don't always go to plan. Not everybody has our best interests at heart. And even when they do, they don't always execute that. They don't always implement that in a way that is helpful. Maybe said in a way centered less on our feelings and more on we'll say a kind of egalitarian approach to this is that all energy serves us best when it is in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
And so much of the talks that we have centered around themes of protection and psychic self-defense relate to positive and negative energies. And I really try to take the kind of, we'll say, morally neutral approach. Electricity is not inherently good or bad. There is no philosophical or moral goodness to the energy that is electricity. It's just a bunch of electrons. They aren't good or evil, but electricity in a useful application can warm our homes and light our spaces and help us cook our food. Electricity in the harmful applications could zap you, could shock you, could kill you. And the same thing is kind of true with subtle energies. For the most part, they're not inherently good or bad, but someone else's emotions may not serve the space in my office really well. Someone else's expectations and attachments are going to be maybe better applied to their goals than mine. And really the idea behind psychic self-defense is learning the kind of fundamental principles of our own, we'll say, psychic hygiene, our own kind of a spiritual cleanliness routine, as well as being able to maintain healthy boundaries that allow good and useful, I say good, but maybe I should say helpful and useful energies that are in alignment with our purpose come and go freely. And those things that might be considered disruptive rather than evil or bad to be filtered out.
So, I mean, we could describe that as being in a toxic relationship or being in a space that an argument took place and there's that negative, that residue that's lingering around, that when you walk into a space, I think everybody at some point, you can identify with that. You feel it when something's happened in a space, also when something's occurred on land that, nothing, violence never serves anybody, but the residual feelings of that can be experienced. They can linger around if things aren't moved and cleared properly. A couple of years ago, I was in Nepal with my teacher, and we did a whole ritual around clearing curses known and unknown. The reason why I find your book this particular one about psychic self-defense so valuable is because, as you just mentioned, there's not, we're always talking about things from this more positive sense, protect yourself from this or protect yourself from that, right? But when we hear something like a curse, it sounds really old-fashioned. It sounds like something from the Middle Ages, and it is, right? Or sorcery or things like this, but they can be very modern things as well. And we just don't use the phrases or think of a sorcerer, a modern day sorcerer, or somebody casting a modern day curse. So I really think your book is invaluable because you're offering really tangible exercises, practices in here for people to sense into. Have they has a curse been cast upon them, and what to sort of do to identify these things, as well as other stuff. So that's where I want to go with this interview with you, because you have really very specific things in here: warding off energy from a space, binding, banishing. Banishing's an invaluable tool that I don't think we talk about that often. In fact, we barely even use the word banishing today in modern times, right? So why is it important to understand? And firstly, let's just start with what's warding. Why would somebody need to ward off or ward their space?
Yeah, so I think this is a great place to get started because this is something we can do very simply. It is something that we can integrate into our normal routine and decor, perhaps. And it kind of works in the realm of prevention rather than treatment. And, as the cliche says, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the word to ward is related to words like guard and guardian and steward, and it comes from an older root that means like sentinel or protector. So, in kind of magical lingo, a ward is environmental protection. Usually, and although there are going to be practitioners and authors who may disagree on this, but I take it to mean something that is anchored to a space rather than a person or an object. So I consider warding to be something that I would do around my home, my office, maybe a more mobile space like my car. And this is something that helps us in a few ways. Personal protection is always important. How we treat our own personal boundaries is useful, but when we get to our home should be our temple, our castle, our sacred space. We shouldn't have to have our defenses on guard at all times. It allows us an opportunity to relax. Also, there are moments while we're in our home spaces where we are not focused on our own personal protections because we're not conscious or because we're distracted or because there are more important things to do, like hop in the shower or cook dinner. And we necessarily will kind of relax those energetic boundaries. And so words give us the opportunity to kind of reset energetically to help us filter out things that won't be harmful, that will be harmful, that aren't useful for us. And they also help us cultivate the kind of energy that we would like. If we think of it as, I often think of like good protection is like a selectively permeable membrane, like we have in our cells. The cell membrane allows certain things to come and go freely. For example, water, passes without any kind of energetic requirement. There's no metabolic fuel taking place. Other things require specific ions to open a channel or a pump. Other things require more energy to take place. And then other substances or objects don't make it past that threshold whatsoever. So a good protection, whether it is personal or in our space as a ward, some sort of environmental boundary, is going to still allow the free flow of things like joy, abundance, healing, peace, and is going to filter out things that feel disruptive or intrusive or that are just not welcome, whatever that might look like for you and your space and your situation. A good ward is going to help us cultivate the good stuff and still allow us the chance to discharge what doesn't serve. We have to be able to exhale the waste, so to speak. And so I devote a fair amount of time in the book just giving people different ways that they might choose to ward their space, either with grids or other activities that can be fun to use around the home.
You do. You have some really great grids and crystals. You have also illustrations and really great photographs of some of the grids in here. How do you lay out a grid? Some of them you have that you surround yourself. Are we laying on the floor surrounding ourselves with certain crystals, or are we just placing them around the house?
All of the above. So I have a friend and colleague, Devin Hunter, who refers to like all of these kinds of activities of grids and layouts and related things as mapping. It's like creating this energetic map of your idealized environment. So we can do this on the body. We can do this around us, around our home. We can also do smaller localized grids that might sit on a tabletop or an altar or someplace else. So the book kind of has all of these options for you. So with our environmental wards, the ones that I have in the book are largely focused on ways that we can lay things around our home, our office, or wherever we might be. And we can concentrate it on a single room if that's the entirety of our space that we have agency over. We can also extend it to a whole apartment or house or building, property, whatever the kind of constraints of our 3D space might be. In other sections of the book, there are going to be grids that we can lay on or around the body. We often refer to those as crystal layouts or crystal arrays. I have a colleague who calls them crystal nets. But the idea is that we get situated inside that, and we either lay the stones around us or on top of us or some combination of the two. And the great thing about grids is they lean into this idea. They lean into the like law of synergy, wherein the sum total is greater. The net effects, we'll say, is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not just, I'm putting these 7 labradorites around me and it's, this kind of additive quality. It becomes exponentially larger when we kind of sync together all of these components of a grid.
Okay. And you have some of those grids require quite a few. You just said, 7 labradorites. But there's others. There was another one in here for, I think it's a banishing grid or maybe a different type of grid. But anyway, you have like, I think 11 or so hematites or something. I might be wrong, but I know it's in here. There's like quite a lot of pictures. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's so many crystals you need to go out and get. Are there do you need to be using that many? What if you can't afford to go out and buy all these crystals? Are there like top 5 that you recommend that you keep in your sort of crystal arsenal to have protection around your home or in your environment?
Yeah, so when it comes to grid making, there are a few workarounds. First and foremost, with things in the book that required multiples, I tried to keep most of those fairly affordable. Hematite you can find for $1 or two. They don't have to be large. They could be small beads or chips, and if that's in your budget, go for that. There are a handful of things where you need 4 of this or a couple of those, and that even that number is contingent upon the shape of your space, right? Theoretically, if you lived in a triangular home, maybe we only need 3 of each. If you live in, a strange non-rectangular home, then you might need a different number of them. But when all else fails, we can also look at the rocks in our local landscape. So elsewhere in the book, the last chapter, which is that directory of 145 stones, in addition to some of our favorite precious gems and rare and unusual crystals that we use in crystal healing, you're also going to find some pretty common features of many a landscape. Things like flint and chalk and marble and granite and basalt, because they have these kind of protective qualities that have been celebrated since antiquity, and they'd be really good options. So I tend to think of things like grids as a lot like recipes in a cookbook. When we are inexperienced, when we're not a great cook yet, when we're unfamiliar with an ingredient, we just follow the recipe to the T to ensure that we get it right. And if we don't, we realize it's probably our fault because we didn't follow instructions. So those grids are lists of ingredients, and the instructions are, the kind of cookery methodology. But when we know something really well, maybe we go, hey, I don't quite have as many hematites as are called for in this grid, but I've got a multiple that kind of fits this shape, and I've got a lot of clear quartz or smoky quartz tumbles. Maybe I could use those instead. Or there's a lot of flint in the gravel driveway. Maybe I could make my own grid inspired by this. And it's one of those things where, just like cooking, when you get really familiar, when you have a deeper, more intimate knowledge of the components, you know how to make substitutions effectively. There could be a recipe where you're like, oh, I don't have any paprika, so I'm gonna use nutmeg instead. But a different recipe, if you made that substitution, the end result
Yeah.
could be disastrous.
And it is true, the more adept you become over time, your intuition really guides you to what should be placed where and what you might need. And then you may just pick up this book one day and be like, oh my gosh, I've actually got these. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize I had placed, a large crystal certain thing, whether it's a labradorite or an amethyst, on the windowsill, and find you've actually got a few of them that have been placed there because you were guided to do so. So I think also trusting your intuition on where things should go is also, you're being led for a reason. So you have this word that I asked you about before we started recording, apotropaic. Can you please explain what does it mean? You use it quite a bit in your book.
Yeah, so apotropaic comes from the Greek roots apo, which means apart. We see that, for example, in the mineral apophyllite,
Mm.
apophylos, apart layers, because it splits evenly in layers. And then the tropos, which means to turn. In this case, it's to turn away, apart, away, asunder, and then to turn. So it's averting harmful energy. This could be kind of broadly speaking, protecting us against any kind of harmful or intrusive influence. Historically, we often see things regarded as apotropaic when it is specifically turning away the influence of harmful magic. We find that like in the anthropological record and historical records with that kind of meaning. But today it kind of has this broader sense of protection by averting unwanted, intrusive, harmful, or malevolent forces.
Thank you. I mean, that's really the theme of your book, and I just wanted you to explain that. As I said before, you're using it constantly, but this book psychic self-defense is about protecting ourselves ultimately, whether it's from, somebody that's thinking badly of us or just whatever the energy in the space for whatever reason. It could be geopathic or just residual energy from a previous residents that, didn't have a good experience there, or other negative forces that might have taken place. So, you have this really great section, and I'm just going to hold up a picture here of sort of an example quickly of a grid.
Yeah, so this one's got some larvikite and chrysoprase and a handful of other stones. This is the quote unquote invisibility layout, and it doesn't actually make you invisible to 3D space, but energetically helps us leave less of an imprint, less of an impact wherever we go. So if we suspect that we may be the target of some kind of, we'll say, psychic spying or psychic intrusion, it's kind of like puts the veil over our energy field so we aren't detectable by those sources.
And so, what might psychic spying feel like, right? How would somebody know they're being watched, through the ethers?
Yeah, so let's take a step back even further, and we're going to kind of zoom in on this, and let's talk about the effects of psychic harm at large. And psychic harm comes via a lot of different sources and manifests in a lot of different ways. So, unlike a really cursory, first hurdle we might experience, it could be poor sleeping, a sense of fatigue, a shift in our emotions. Maybe we're more irritable, maybe we feel down, maybe we just feel a little bit high strung. We might also start to sense what a colleague of mine, Jason Miller, calls a sense of being out of step with time. It's like you're always in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're missing every stoplight. You're just things aren't lining up with you. So more than that, we can start to look at things like a genuine sense of impending doom or dread, with no discernible cause, unusual pains, recurring dreams, all kinds of other disruptions in our life, again, without any apparent cause. The more we start to look at the symptoms of psychic harm broadly, the more we have to recognize that there are parallels between these and other things that can happen in life. Like, did you just get a new job? Are you really stressed out by it? Maybe that's it and it's not psychic attack. Are you recovering from, some sort of long-term bout of illness? Maybe it's that and not psychic attack. So we always have to rule out the mundane, the material. We also have to be mindful that some of the really extreme manifestations of psychic harm, things that resemble paranormal phenomena and other things, can also be symptoms that can be associated with certain kinds of mental illness. So we want to ensure that we don't jump to any conclusions. We never want to self-diagnose or diagnose someone else for something that is not accurate. So always exercise a certain amount of caution. But, ultimately, when we start to see a lot of these signs lining up, one or two things on the list, I wouldn't stress about. If you're just experiencing headaches and low energy and poor sleep, maybe that's nothing. But when you get that sense of being out of step with time, a sense of despair, unusual behavior from people and animals around you that was never there before, all these other kinds of things, then we go, I wonder I wonder if I should look into this. And with the case of something like what we call psychic intrusion or psychic spying, it's very much what it sounds like. Someone is energetically, spiritually, psychically keeping tabs on you. I would say
It's
the
watching. It's like a form of watching almost. I don't
yeah,
want to say remote viewing because that's different, but it's like, and I can actually talk about this from firsthand experience. It's like somebody who understands this form of this application is able to place a watcher, so to speak, a spy, in your energetic field or close to it in the ethers, and that entity is, sort of reporting back what's going on. What are you doing? What are the things? Until you become aware of it and then understand how to either cloak yourself with the technique that you're offering in your book or some other method.
right.
For me, I became aware of it when I had sensed this actually. So I moved, I live in Vermont now. So I moved here 4 years ago. So before in my previous place in New York, I could definitely feel, I was really feeling into it. And I thought, wow, okay, this is interesting. And I had created a shield around myself psychically, not using crystals, not a grid, but literally I know how to do that. So I was able to literally shield myself energetically with lead, right? So I could create that energetically my space and just sort of create this barrier around me. Then when I moved homes, we sold our house, we bought a place up here, we moved to Vermont, and I'm on a lot of land. It was so interesting. It was like it had come with me, but it wasn't in my actual physical home. It was on the on the land, and there was and I had been working very closely with my teacher, who's a 27th generation Nepalese shaman, and we had detected this particular entity, and so I could actually see it in my mind's eye during my ritual work, and I was very aware of it, and it had almost lost its energetic drive, so to speak. But it was still there, and we did some very advanced work to literally send it, to ward it away, to ward it off, to banish it, to send it back to its creator, but also sending it away with love, loving energy, so that it can dissolve. Because we both we knew that it actually wasn't serving a purpose for this individual anymore. It was almost like it had sort of run its course, and there was, for whatever I knew the reasons, but we were sort of like, all right, doesn't need to be here. And it was actually draining my son, who was getting really tired, all the things you described. He was experiencing extreme lethargy, and I was just like, okay, I'm strong enough to know how to do the work to protect myself, but it's draining and affecting my son, and I needed to actually keep him held in a space, and then have this. And my son's quite tuned in as well, so he actually could see it, and and very clearly, and he was like that. He described it as like No Face from the Spirited
Spirited
Away
Away.
movie.
Yeah.
And so he said it's like No Face, and also that sort of almost passive aggressive type of personality that No Face has in that, as that character in the film. And that is exactly how I saw it as well, but I didn't actually see the way. It was more this sort of cloaked black being and shadow figure, I should say. And so we were able to send it away and dissolve it, and it hasn't been back since. Like, this is like almost 4 years ago. So I just wanted to share that story because it is a very real thing that can happen. So again, this is why I thought, okay, great, you're sharing these tools, because these things do happen. And if you aren't a practitioner, sort of somebody who works in the space of energy or healing or, psychic mediumship or anything like that, where you may be really tuned in and you're picking this up because you suspect something is not right, you can feel yourself, something's just shifted in your world. This is such a great book because you really have broken down a lot of different tools that can otherwise otherwise come across as quite complicated. I have some, ancient, some Buddhist tantric books that share ancient versions of these that are really elaborate and really like, that come literally from, you know, centuries ago. So you're bringing them into the modern world. Okay, so coming back to, why is it important to understand all of these things? Like you shared a little bit of it, but why would somebody be, doing something, sort of casting an evil eye, in a lot of European traditions, we have this evil eye sort of sense, and you'll see it in Turkey and in Italy and in other parts of the world where they still will, use where the women will wear the chilies on their neck, the mariocco, the symbol with the hands, and they'll wear these protective amulets, right? So let's just talk about that for a minute. What's the significance? How old are these, and how can we use them in modern times?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. We started the conversation around this idea that although I do believe in the inherent goodness of our universe and human beings, we're also human beings, right?
Mhm.
We have a wide range of emotions that we're going to feel. We've got our own baggage. We inherit baggage from our family, from our cultures, from our communities, from maybe previous lifetimes. And that can really color our perceptions. And the thing about a lot of crystal books that deal with the topic of protection is they really are very love and light. Let's just throw some sunshine and crystals and rainbows at it, and it's going to get better. And I think for most things, the average person is going to experience most of the time. That probably works pretty well. But there are some heavier things out there. And especially these last, I don't know, 8 years or so, we felt some really intensely powerful things worldwide, particularly here in the US, but definitely worldwide. There's a lot going on. The world is on fire. There are strong emotions. There are strong intentions. There's a lot of fear, and we can't necessarily just hold some rose quartz and hope it will go away. And so we need some techniques
Mhm.
that have some tooth and nail to them. And if we compare the way the kind of modern new agey metaphysical world has approached protection over the last 20 years in particular versus, millennia worth of protection, we see that there has been, we'll say, some tooth and nail, some spine, some bite throughout history. And I think so long as our goal is always harm reduction, then whatever methodology is going to help us reduce the net harm being enacted in the world is an effective technique. So, if we look at some of the earliest written texts that there are, particularly ones of any kind of spiritual nature, they discuss gems. And the one of the oldest, it's sadly now just a fragment, but one of the oldest books that we know of to exist is a text called Abnishkinshu. It's a Mesopotamian book on stones. And in there are descriptions of stones and their economic and spiritual and medicinal values. And you find some that have some pretty hard hitting things, as well as like the normal parts of human experience. So, when we look at our Malocchio pendants, when we look at all of these other kinds of apotropaic devices, these are really universal human experiences. We we as organisms, like let's put our animalness ahead of our special humanity. As living things, we're going to experience fear. As living things, collectively, we're going to experience danger. As living things, we're going to have moments that are less pleasant. And so culturally, as a human race, we have come up with lots of ways for navigating that, some spiritual, some social and cultural, and so on and so forth. So really the idea behind understanding how universal these experiences are, it gives us permission to work through that instead of just saying, oh, we got to gaslight ourselves, we got to practice the spiritual bypassing. I'm too evolved to feel fear. Well, congratulations. You've probably just made that worse. Somewhere in your body, mind, or spirit, you've stuffed that down so far, it's going to come out again later and worse. And even though things like genuine psychic attack and formal ritual curse are in fact very, very rare, it's that stuff that we stuff down below our liminal threshold that leaks out, that comes to a head, that can be very unconscious. It could be unconscious envy and jealousy that we never process the root of. It can be unconscious fear. It could be a learned behavior that comes from our family. It could be linguistic things that we never stop to examine that are just part of our everyday speech that are, predisposing us towards perceiving the world in a given way. We can't just, throw a pretty crystal at that and make it go away. We have to like do some deeper work. And when we encounter the underlying patterns beneath that, especially when they're generational things, when they're longer standing things, it's not work we're going to do overnight. And it's not work that we're going to do by just saying, oh, well, I'm too evolved for this. So we have to learn how to show up for that stuff and to give ourselves the grace to work through it. And also to recognize that even if the world is inherently good, people sometimes do some pretty ugly things out of fear.
And so, can banishing, well, we'll just talk about what is banishing.
So, banishing is a spiritual or magical or energetic means of removing an influence from our life, from a scenario, from our home. If what would be a good analogy?
Well, I think also you can apply banishing to the things you just previously mentioned that have
Yeah,
come through, right? So maybe just talk to that point of how you can apply, firstly, the tool, the skill, the act of banishing. What is that ritual? How does one apply that? And then maybe an example or two of aspects of their life they might be able to use that for in the modern world.
yeah. So banishing has this kind of turning away quality, this sending back, sending out. It's saying no, thank you, and never again wherever possible. So this is something that we might do since the book is specifically about crystals. Let's talk about some crystals that have these kinds of banishing influences. On the one hand, we want to look at things that have a kind of Saturnian quality. You mentioned this lead shield, the psychic shield of lead. Lead minerals are in fact ruled by the planet Saturn because lead is its planetary metal. So these could be things like
Mhm.
galena would be one that's relatively safe to handle. Amazonite, which has very, very tiny amounts of lead in it. We could also look at some other things that have these Saturnian qualities of slowness, dullness, darkness, but not as in evil, as in absence of light. So some other banishing stones that kind of meet these qualities would be things like obsidian and to some degree or another we could look at maybe smoky quartz or tantalite, tiger's eye, things that have this kind of Saturnian heft to them. Banishing magic is often one of my first lines of defense when my normal stuff hasn't been effective. If I am practicing good psychic hygiene and I cleanse myself in my space regularly and I'm shielding myself regularly and I have wards in my home, if all of those layers fail even after I refresh them, then I probably go, something is here that doesn't belong. And so I would like to remove it. And that's where those kind of banishing stones, banishing influences are going to come in.
You've got a very specific banishing grid that uses crystals.
Mm. So this is based on an astrological seal, a glyph associated with the planet Saturn. And so all of the stones that are in it have Saturnian qualities to them. In certain kinds of esoteric interpretations of the color rays and the planets associated with them, emerald becomes a stone connected to Saturn. And since Saturn was originally an agricultural deity, that also kind of tracks with the greenness of the stone.
Mm.
Galena, because of its lead content, its lead sulfide is, the chief metal of lead right there. And then jet is made out of dead things. Also something that Saturn would rule. It's, found in the earth and is a great option. So that is one that can be a really powerful banishing spell. It
Well,
can be as
how
simple
do you
as
use that? Like, I know you say that, but I know you explain in the book, but do you create that grid and lay it on your chest, or do you do a big one and have it like how do we use that? Because this is a great tool.
Mhm. So on the following page in the book, there's like a blank copy of just the sigil. So someone could trace it by hand or, photocopy or whatever they need to do that, or just freestyle it. I would draw that seal of Saturn on a piece of paper. Otherwise, trace it on something. Maybe you want to do it in a dish of salt or, a bed of sand outside, whatever works for you. And then you're going to lay the crystals on it. And earlier in the book, there are some instructions for how we can charge or activate our grids. But think of grids as almost akin to like crafting sigils in ceremonial magic or in witchcraft or in other practices. They're just a different tool for creating these kind of energetic templates. If we had a specific known influence that we were banishing from our lives, we might write that on a piece of paper and place it under the central stone, in this case, the galena that goes into that grid. If it were a person and we had an object ethically that belonged to them or had come in contact with them, we might use that as our means of kind of focusing the spell on that direction, or focusing the grid's effects on removing this influence from our lives. And when all else fails, maybe we're doing this on the fly, we forget to write something down, or we don't know the source, we can program the grid. We can set our focus and kind of channel our raw emotive power along with our intention into the idea of banishing this harmful influence. Even if we don't know what it is, we experience the effects of that influence. And sometimes that's all it takes. And it can be a really effective tool for doing that.
In the same chapter, you talk about binding. So what's the difference between banishing and binding?
So banishing is removing an influence. Binding is more about removing agency. So it is not my first choice in tools that I will turn to. I always want to go for things that are going to respect the agency of other people and really kind of bring the focus on me, not because I want to be selfish, but because I am perfectly allowed to decide what happens in my life with certain respect to the people I interact with. But of course, I'm sovereign here. And the thing about binding is that it can help us, if our goal is always to reduce the net amount of harm going out into the world. Binding is a tool that we can use to disempower someone from enacting harm. I would not think of binding as reducing someone's power altogether. I always want to kind of hone in on the specificity of reducing harm. We find, oh gosh, just countless examples of binding magic from the ancient world. Ligature spells, usually made with like knots or bits of leather that could be tied around things. Binding tablets written in lead and sometimes other materials, and just lots of other examples of this. They often focus on themes of justice. Historically, someone turned to binding magic when they were harmed, when power was abused, when the systems that be did not justly address the needs of either individuals or groups. So binding magic can be a really fun, maybe not fun, but a really effective collective practice as well. And we do see this in lots of communities that practice magical activism. They band together and focus on things like let's bind the agency of patriarchy. Let's bind the agency of white supremacy. Let's bind the power of this. It's not, I don't like this person, and therefore I want to harm them. It's the way the system is set up disempowers people. So how about we take power away from the system, and then people's natural agency takes over? And that's whether we're doing it on this collective level or we're doing it on the individual level. I think that is the premise at hand, regardless.
And so what have you personally used binding for? Because you talk about it in this chapter and you say it's something I've used, and then you show an example of your black yarn and a quartz crystal
Yeah.
that you wrapped around. So
Yes.
talk about that.
I remember the time that was probably the most pointed and affected with this really simple spell. So this binding spell just takes any old rock. Funnily enough, the rock in this picture is one I picked up in Vermont. Beautiful sedimentary rock. I just love the strata in it, and it felt nice in the hand, so I used it for this photo. And also because it's just a humble piece of rock. And some black yarn or cord, embroider floss, pick whatever you got. But I had a friend of mine who was undergoing some pretty egregious, mostly unconscious psychic attack. This is a person who didn't know Kat personally, and didn't know my friend personally, but definitely knew of her influence, knew of how, through, like a domino effect, one person's effects were touching someone else's. And just the maladaptive kind of psychic state of this person was sending a lot of chaotic and harmful energies out. And again, this is not someone who was an adept magician. This is not someone who knew how to ritually curse someone. It's not someone who knew that what they were doing was amounting to psychic harm. but that's how it worked out. And we tried all the other steps first. Well, let's step up our protection. Let's talk about psychic shielding. Let's take what you're already doing and remix it, because if we do the same thing all the time, then if we get an intruder once, they know how to get through the system every time. If we get someone who breaks into our home because they know our alarm code, we can't just keep setting the alarm. We have to do something different. And so one of the things that we eventually settled on was some binding magic, and it was really effective. So essentially, you take the stone and you want to kind of establish a connection between the stone and the target, known or unknown. It's always, I think, easier for us psychologically when we know the source, but even if we don't, we can kind of name it as the source of our harm. And then you take that black cord and you start tying it and looping it, and you want to cover every inch, no gap of stone peeking through the yarn whatsoever. And as you do so, you might repeat a phrase like "I bind blank from doing harm." You might visualize them being tied up psychically. Of course, we're not physically tying a person, but we're binding their agency to create harm in the world. And then when that is done, we can conclude the ritual just by disposing of that stone somewhere. I'm a big proponent of finding a body of water and popping it in there. I like to use a natural fiber yarn for this purpose. You might bury it, preferably off your property.
Mhm.
A crossroads is a traditional place of disposing of these kinds of things. And, in the modern world, I have a local friend who came up, who shared a really great method for disposing of something at a crossroads. If you don't want to be the weirdo who's trying to dig up something on the side of the road in the middle of the night, um, go to the nearest gas station, which is at an intersection of streets, probably. And if not, drive to the next closest gas station. And when you're pumping gas, just toss it in the trash bin right there. It's still proximal enough to the crossroads to work its magic.
That's a good tip because, yeah, I have been that person who's done
Me too.
crazy person and then or at sunrise trying to get to a body of water for something
Mhm,
to be
mhm.
cast into water. Oh my gosh. Okay, so what is this grid and how do we, I mean, these are small pieces of hematite, so I'm assuming you can use that just on a table or the floor or whatever, but what is this used for? And if people are listening to this, you can watch this on YouTube later and you can just see, this section.
So this is the grid that I call the mirror cage grid. A piece of, we'll say, magical protection, magical binding, magical reversal that I've seen in the past are things like mirror spells, where you want to bounce things back to someone. You create this kind of reflective quality energetically, so whatever they're sending your way ends up back home. There are some ethical considerations. We're going to circle back around to this in a moment, but as far as the mechanics go, I really wanted to kind of find a crystal-based method for this that looks maybe a little less occulty for those of us who don't want to burn candles on mirrors. I mean, I'm all for it in my own life, but not every one of my clients or students, that's not really their lifestyle. It is a
Yeah,
crystal book after all.
perfect.
Um, so the kind of shape of it, that equal armed cross, is, something that is anchoring, that is stabilizing, that is also protective. It might also maybe symbolize the crossroads and therefore the essence of change and liminality. The important thing to note when we talk about any kind of reversal or deflective magic, when we send harm back where it came from, which is within our right to do so, right? If we're sitting down in a restaurant and the server brings us something we didn't order, we send it back to the kitchen. Like, oh, no, no, thank you. I actually, asked for the salad and not the soup.
Yeah.
And we get it taken care of. There's no real harm to be done in that. But in the case of, psychic harm, that's going to land somewhere. It's
Mhm.
not just going to go into a kitchen and be disposed of. So
And people might be wondering why, as you explained. Can you just talk about why energetically?
yeah, so this is kind of a violent image, but it's effective for kind of getting the point across. If someone were shooting a gun at you and the bullet bounced off, wherever it lands is going to cause damage. It might not hit anything or
There.
anyone of any import, However, it might also influence the person who pulled the trigger, which is probably going to upset them more and make them want to do it again. It might also hit an innocent bystander. So we call this kind of magical or energetic back and forth. Sometimes it's referred to as crossfire or psychic blowback. It can also like rebound upon ourselves if we're not effective, if we haven't like braced ourselves enough to volley that energy back, then we can drain ourselves in such big ways. So anytime we do something that is a kind of reversal of energy flow, we want to be really mindful. So there are two versions of the grid in the book. One of them is, I'm reasonably certain this is going to go back where it came from. Nobody else is going to be impacted. They're going to learn their lesson, and I've done my job, and I don't have to worry about it again. But we can also do something that is more neutralizing. The next page over on that, I believe, shows it with just 4 little shungites that have been added, and that's going to help to neutralize and contain those energies. So that way, we're not creating this endless back and forth. It's kind of like, no, thank you. I didn't order this. I'd love for you to deal with this on your own now, energetically speaking. I I rarely want to go the route of anything that can possibly energetically endanger someone else. Endanger sounds there's no need to escalate a situation that we can neutralize.
Yeah.
That's probably a much better way, much more succinct way of describing this. If we are adept enough to bounce the bullet off the shield, we're also probably adept enough to just remove the bullet from play altogether. And then nobody gets hurt.
No, that's a good way of putting it. And then you've also in this chapter got reversal magic. Then that, of course, has another set of tools and applications here. Why would somebody be using reversal magic?
So colloquially, reversal magic can mean a couple of different things. On the one hand, it might be that kind of counter magic. I'm reversing the flow of this. You've sent this at me. I'm bouncing it back to you. Reversal magic is sometimes also used with kind of like the notion of like a reversal of fortune or reversal of fate. When we have what might be referred to as crossed conditions, things are just constantly wrong time, wrong place, bad luck, misfortune. Whether we think we've been cursed or we actually have been, often the same ritual remedies the situation. But the power of reversal magic lies in its ability to offer this kind of inversion of a situation that might teach a magical lesson if you are in fact being targeted, but it also might just be like inverting the state of things so we have a sense of agency again. Because I hate to put it so bluntly, most of the problems we experience in our lives, socially, psychically, and otherwise, are our own fault. So reversal magic aimed at ourselves doesn't make things worse for us. In fact, gets us out of our own way. So there is a smoky quartz reversal spell that's in here that can be used in either of these kinds of meanings. The situation where we need that reversal of fortune because it just feels like life is out to get us. It's probably some part at one level or another. We have some part to play in that. We might also use it to reverse energies or situations that are being caused by an outside influence.
I mean, I love the fact that you have it as a personal thing because I think we often forget that, like you said, we can get in our own way. And so that is a really, I want to say simple application, but it's a way to get you into that headspace of understanding and feeling into how you might actually be causing your own, attracting your own negative influences unbeknownst to you without realizing it. Okay, so you have this wonderful section on spirits. How do we use crystals to, protect ourselves from, or I guess to deal with spirits? So that could be in the form of an exorcism, because you don't necessarily think of using a crystal, to your point, grabbing a rose quartz and, saying, oh, love and light, everything's going to be fine.
Here's another one of those topics that I think our average crystal book just doesn't really address. If we can't love and light our way out of the situation, we're just going to move on to the next topic and ignore that there are some very real magical and spiritual phenomena out there that require heavier hitting tools. And, further, this is not a new idea. Working with gems, working with mineral tools as our materia magica is something that extends very far back in time. So it's not really a new agey fad to find a crystal that sends away evil spirits. While that sounds silly on the surface level, we have an incredible amount of evidence that stones have been used for processes like this in lots of different cultures around the world. So the thing about dealing with spirits is we, much like figuring out if something really is a genuine psychic attack or some other kind of psychic harm or disruption, we do have to kind of, you know, we'll say navigate those spaces really conscientiously to ensure that we are not adding paranoia or hysteria to a situation that will in fact make it worse when there is not a paranormal phenomenon at play. But once we've just discovered that there is some kind of spirit or spiritual phenomena working out, the kinds of stones that we turn to are often ones that either through the historical record or through maybe we can look at their crystallography and chemistry are going to have this like really strong purgative quality of almost like in herbalism, we've got things that are vermifuges. They expel parasites. We want to look to stones that can help us expel astral parasites and spiritual parasites of other varieties. And so, historically, we've got things like jet and sulfur and amber that might have been used for this. Jet was historically burned as part of exorcism rituals, sulfur as well, but we want to be mindful that burning sulfur in an enclosed space is really bad for us to breathe in. Other gems might have some folkloric
I
associations.
thought amber was interesting because I had never really considered amber as and I love wearing amber, and occasionally I'll feel called to really wear the amber necklace. How is amber something we can use for this?
On the one hand, amber and jet were once considered essentially two varieties of the same stone. And before the advent of modern science, particularly modern earth sciences, geology, how we classified gemstones was often a lot more superficial, but they're both resinous in luster. They're both lightweight. They can be found washed on the shore, maybe not always the same shore at the same time, but therefore they were thought to have a common origin. Both are also flammable, so burning one or the other was thought to produce a kind of smoke or vapor that was excellent for purifying the space. These were also things that in the ancient world were considered very, very precious. So burning a precious object might have also been very similar to like burnt offerings to gods or spirits to kind of implore them for their help. So there are a lot of ways that that has manifested in the medieval era in particular. The two stones started to be differentiated in application, although shared a lot of, we'll say, morphological similarities. They were both burned, but for different reasons. So we might consider them both being burned for good health, one to drive out evil and one to kind of invoke the qualities of good health in the case of jet versus amber, respectively. But amber, being the resin of some very, very ancient trees, has this quality of wisdom and life force and vitality. If we think about what that resin is, like anything in the tree's body, it is sunlight made solid. It is also something that resembles sunlight, and we sometimes see it described as the tears of the sun, tears of the sun god, sun goddess. Sometimes they are tears wept by those who saw the death of a solar or light deity in certain myths around the world. So we get this kind of solar quality, and light casts out darkness, right? If you are in a dark room and you want the dark to go away, you flip on the switch, you light a candle, you open the window, whatever it might be. So amber has that quality of light that could be really useful in a situation like this.
So if you could continue, please, about using crystals to help ward off, spirits, spirit invasion, or use them for exorcism even.
Yeah, so I will say that the number of times I've ever had the opportunity to do something like this are pretty few and far between. It has happened. I'm grateful that it's not super often. That's not the thing I'm called to. An exorcist, I am not. That is not my job. And also like the word exorcism as I use it in the book is maybe not like what we think of with,
In
you
the
know,
movies.
yeah, in the movies, where it is a word that essentially means, similar to apotropaic means to turn away. Um, Exorcism comes from a root that is like to swear against, to swear out. We call upon some sort of higher force that ejects some other force, some other presence. Oftentimes, the things we're really exercising are the same things we banish through other means. It's our own influence. It is real low level kind of stuff. So when we have those kinds of, we'll say, lower intensity situations, We could use some pretty easy tools. If you've got a handful of amethyst crystals, single points, there is an amethyst grid. It's just a ring of 9 single terminated crystals that you can use, especially to remove an influence from an object. There is a grid that's kind of inspired by like the Mesopotamian incantation bowls where we see it first in Mesopotamia, but in later cultures where the incantations are written in a spiral along the inside, usually, but sometimes the outside of these clay or pottery bowls. And so there's a grid that creates a similar kind of effect, drawing things in towards center. And then, inspired by the work of a couple of my colleagues in the crystal world, I've got a couple other grids that we can use for spirit release or for, we'll say, opening a safety release valve through which we can allow things to go. And then, based more on like the historical kind of stuff, there's a sulfur and salt exorcism. Both of them are minerals. We don't always stop and remember that salt is in fact a mineral. It's one that we have interacted with for a real long time and has this powerful quality of, just like it dehydrates things, it can also kind of suck the movement, suck the fluidity out of a situation. I mean, to dry up those kind of paranormal situations, we can let them crystallize and be cured. The word
Yeah.
cure, of course, being related etymologically in two ways here. So that's kind of a simple ritual that we can do with, a dish of salt, a few candles, a hunk of sulfur, largely anything other than the kind of environmental, or we'll say the situation that might be attached to an object, however mundane it might be. That's really what this chapter deals with. Formal rituals for more involved situations aren't in the book. I'm not qualified to teach you that, and also I think nobody should be performing that without a good amount of training and experience. There are a couple of great books for folks who want to learn more. Josephine McCarthy has a book called The Exorcist Handbook, and then there's a new edition of Jason Miller's book on protection and reversal magic that has a chapter on exorcism, where even he doesn't give a detailed ritual. The idea is if you can read the about, you can generate your own how-to. And so he writes in that way. So only the folks who will know how to construct a ritual, who have the ritual background, can do so. So I kind of followed that vein and didn't give really precise directions for exercising people, because you probably won't ever have to. And if you do, this is not the book that's going to give it to you.
No, no, 100%. And thank you for bringing that up. It's really important that people understand that. Like that's sort of, it's not a cautionary tale. It's like you're not going to read a book about open heart surgery and then go and try and perform that on somebody who's, having a heart attack. It's the same with psychic, applications. You have to be an adept at very certain things and understand because these are forces that can things can go not in the way you intend them to very quickly if you don't understand all the energies and what's happening and know how to protect yourself and so on. So no, thank you for bringing that really super important point up. Now, and on that sort of point of crystals and protection, when I was telling that story earlier of my son being affected, I then placed selenite instinctively, intuitively in his room in the windowsill. And I also we have a whole section of wild mugwort that grows. So I went and cut some and actually asked the blessings and support of the mugwort and then dried it and hung it in his room, made little bunches, hung them on the window, put some under his bed, his pillow, and then had selenite around on his shelves and his windows just to kind of up level and support that, create a barrier, essentially a protective barrier around, so that as we were doing this work to ward off this spy, psychic watcher, he would be held and protected, and it worked really well. It was great. But so now you have these really great at the back of the book. We have 145 gemstones. Can I call them all out and list them? But what are your favorites to work with here? I mean, I love that you nerd out on all of the gems. I love your background, that you have such an extensive background in almost science, geology. You really understand the formations of crystals, of stones, of gems, of all of it. So what are your top go-tos in here?
There are so many stones that throughout history have been associated with protection. And when I say throughout history, I don't just mean old history. There are a lot more rocks and minerals that we can identify today that we have discovered that we didn't have access to before. And this is still history. I mean, if it happened last week, it's part of our historical record. So, given that, it was so hard to like whittle this down to a reasonable amount. I was thinking it was going to be a book that was much smaller with about 75 crystals in it, and then it ballooned pretty rapidly to over 100, and I thought 120 sounds nice. And then I don't know, my instinct kept telling me 150 was too many. So eventually I settled on 145. That was just the number it came to. I have a bunch that didn't make the cut. There are B-sides. I've saved them. There'll be some other project, who knows when. But as far as ones that I work with on a fairly regular basis, labradorite is something that I wear almost anytime I have to leave the house. I identify as a highly sensitive person. I think if I sought someone who made those kinds of clinical designations, they would agree with me pretty easily. And I find myself these days handling that much better than I did earlier in life. But labradorite is one of the tools that I've turned to learn how to maintain that selectively permeable membrane around me that
Mhm.
really helps my light shine, but keeps out the things that aren't useful, helpful, or aligned with purpose. So it's not a real heavy kind of barrier. I also work with Preseli bluestone on a regular basis. There's always some within arm's reach. So here at my computer, I have this little moon gazing hair carved out of this. And this is a rock that comes from northwestern Wales. It is one of the famous materials used in the construction of Stonehenge. It's certainly not the only material. The big, big, big trilithons are another rock, which I'm wearing, called sarsen stone, also in the book. But Preseli is great because it is both anchoring and expansive. There is kind of a steadfastness about it that isn't necessarily geared towards building a wall that keeps other stuff out, but it really helps us anchor ourselves in such a way that anything we encounter that isn't useful to us has a safe outlet, has a way to be discharged. It has this ability of, I'll say, helping us draw from the well of stamina when we need it the most. So when we are experiencing psychic harm, internally or externally generated, we need the energy required to work through that. We got to have some power to to get through the noise of the world and make it through those moments. So I find Preseli really useful for that. Another stone that I turn to for its kind of protective qualities on a fairly regular basis is obsidian.
Mm.
Obsidian is this stone that, in no uncertain terms, helped me become a writer in the first place. That's why it's the first chapter of my very first book ever, and it has remained a really powerful ally ever since. So, obsidian is incisive and cutting and kind of slice through harm as it comes in. It also has a reflective quality that can deflect that apotropaic, apotropos, to turn away quality. So that might be a nice one to have facing the front door of the home to turn away things that you didn't invite in. And if I were tasked with picking like one stone that I could work with for the rest of my life, if I could only have one, it would be quartz. The quartz family is broad and diverse. If I pick that, it gives me more wiggle room. But any form of quartz is going to have some qualities of protection. If it's good old-fashioned clear quartz, its resemblance to frozen light, to permanently crystallized water. Light and water are two things that we associate with blessings and life and purity of spirit, and those can be used to kind of circumvent harm. It is durable. It can withstand the erosive nature of time itself. So it lends that same durability to our psyche, our spirit, our body, our home, our energy space, our temple. And then, we can specialize that further with phantom quartz or sulfur quartz or smoky quartz or celestial quartz or amethyst or, all the other varieties. So that would be my cheat. If I could only pick one species, it's
Mhm.
quartz.
And I was surprised to see ruby in there as a protective.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk to the protective qualities of a ruby because that's a stone we don't, I think, at least for me, I didn't think about it. And it is something that I wear.
Ruby is such a wonderful stone. So let's start with this quality related to strength. So ruby is a variety of the mineral corundum. If we look at the Mohs hardness scale, which is more like a comparative chart rather than an absolute scale, but it ranks 9 out of 10 on that comparative scale, which means it's super durable. It is going to be able to withstand quite a lot. Energetically, it confers some of that strength to us. Ruby also throughout history has had some kind of protective qualities associated with it. It has been likened to, its red color is associated with the planet Mars. Mars is, the god of war, of battle, of strength, of overcoming inertia. So when we kind of feel overwhelmed by a situation where we need some protection, Ruby can help us get through it. It's been used historically to confer safety and victory in battle. So, also if we've got this sense of psychic attack, that is a kind of battle of willpower. Even when we're the source of psychic attack, we're still battling our own will to kind of set the record straight. So Ruby could be really helpful there. But it's a gem of emotional fortitude. It can help us turn toward our emotional body, our heart, to find a sense of resilience and strength, help us lean into the discomfort that happens as we journey toward wholeness. What I love about Ruby is that it reminds us that at the end of the day, the fuel for anything is hopefully going to be love. Sometimes we draw from some other tanks, some other fuels, but love really is this transformative quality. And if we allow that to be the energy that spurs us forward, we're going to make it through anything. However grim it appears, we're going to make it through.
I love that. That's really beautiful. Thank you. What a nice description. And it's actually one of my favorite stones, ruby and labradorite. And in India a few years ago, I had a mala made of labradorite and rubies that I
Oh,
wear
wow.
with my, yeah, it's really special. It's really beautiful. And I wear it to work with one of my spirit guides to honor her in particular. And so I pull that. I don't wear it every day, but and it's really stunning. I actually wear it under my clothes. I don't have it out because it does look like a piece of jewelry, but it's a sacred piece for me. Um,
Understood.
yeah, but so thank you. That was also wonderful. And is there anything you would like us to know? When is the book coming out?
Oh, thank you. So yes, the book in the US at least comes out on the 7th of January. It'll be a little bit later in other parts of the world, but distribution will begin then. So you can pre-order it now anywhere books are sold. Definitely check out your local indie crystal store or bookstore. That is a great place to place an order. Books a Million. If you're in the UK, you could do it through Waterstones. I don't know the major retailers elsewhere in the world, but definitely you can pre-order online wherever you like.
It's such a great book. I'm so excited to have this, and actually received a second copy the other day. So I'm gonna have to gift that to somebody because it's so amazing. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add to this that you think is super important to know about psychic self-defense and the crystals to use?
I think if I were going to leave people with one last little bit of advice, it would be getting prescriptive is useful to a point. Obviously, I wrote a directory of 145 stones, so you could go through and find the one that sounds like it matches your situation the best. But at the end of the day, any crystal or mineral or rock or fossil is protective when it nourishes you. So whatever you are depleted in and whatever stone is going to complement that is going to help you reach a state of wholeness wherein your natural boundaries do their job. Also, rocks, for the most part, last a heck of a lot longer than us. They have a quality of resilience, resistance, of durability that we in our fleshy bodies do not have. So any rock is at one level or another going to give us this sense of protection and engender this kind of sympathetic resonance with durability. So, if you're reading through the book and you're like, wow, I can't afford a fine quality emerald and I won't settle for anything less than fine quality, or I've misplaced my favorite amethyst and I don't know what to use, turn to the rocks that are available to you. Look at what you already have in your collection. Look at the jewelry you already own. Go into your backyard or the local park. Find a natural outcropping of rock. Find a building facade with, beautiful granite and lean against it. We don't always have to put the rocks in our pockets or wear them on our person for them to be effective. I think the beauty of stone is that it reminds us that there is a bigger force, that there's a bigger picture. And when we can lean into that, we don't feel alone. We always feel supported. And that makes our problems feel necessarily a lot smaller and more achievable.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And now just a quick reminder of your website. Is it still Luminous Pearl?
Absolutely. So you can find me online at www.theluminouspearl.com or on social media at the Luminous Pearl in most places.
And thank you so much. And the book again is Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, 145 gemstones for banishing, binding, and magical protection. Thank you very, very much. Really love chatting with you.
Thank you.